This is one of those cases that sounds too unbelievable to be true. A 22-year-old woman falls suddenly, violently ill. She calls up her friend in desperation and says, "I can't take it anymore. I need to get to the hospital. Somebody's coming to pick me up." But she never makes it. She vanishes without a trace. The last person to see her? A convicted killer. Before the police can close in, that killer is found, dead, inside the trunk of a car. It's one of the most bizarre twists you'll ever hear. If this was a movie, you'd say the plot was just too unbelievable. But this isn't fiction. This is the disappearance of Jamie Fraley, and it is utterly unbelievable. Jamie Fraley was born on March the 5th, 1986 in Gastonia, North Carolina, and from the very moment of her birth, life was a struggle. Clinically dead at birth, her little lifeless body lay there as doctors tried desperately to revive her. They tried to defy the odds, but their prognosis was grim. Her mother, Kim Fraley, was told that even if she survived the night, she might not live to see her first birthday. But Jamie was a fighter. As an infant, she was frail and underweight, and she struggled with the trauma of that terrible birth that she went through. She had constant health complications, and she spent weeks in the hospital with her mother by her side. Each day, people said a prayer that Jamie would beat the impossible. And in fact, she did. Throughout her childhood, Jamie remained small for her age, waging a war against colds, infections, and digestive issues. Doctors' visits were routine, and even the smallest infection would hit her much harder than most children. And yet, despite her fragile body, her spirit burned so very, very brightly. She was always fighting and always completely determined to keep up with her peers. She had a compassionate heart, and even as a little girl, she could not bear to see anyone else suffer. Whether it was a classmate struggling with their homework or an animal in need, she went out of her way to help. She was constantly determined to make someone else's day a little bit brighter. But in spite of this, as she grew older, a new challenge emerged. At age 18, Jamie was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Her mood swings proved to be brutal. The side effects of the medication that she was given were something that she loathed. On more than one occasion, she stopped taking it, convinced that she could manage without it. Alongside her physical health struggles, navigating young adulthood was nothing less than a Herculean task. Jamie never finished high school, she never earned her driver's license, and she was heavily dependent upon her mother. She clung to the safety of her support system, even though she pushed for independence, and yet she fought and fought and fought and moved forward. With social assistance and the help of a government-appointed health provider, she eventually managed to move into her own independent accommodation. This was at the Copperfield Apartments in Gastonia. At Gaston College, she moved towards achieving her GED, fueled by a dream. She wanted to become a drug counsellor. She was inspired by watching those that she cared about dealing with their addictions. And then in 2006, fate intervened, and she met Ricky Simmons Jr. That was when everything changed. Their connection was absolutely instant. Jamie fell hard and fast for him, and pretty soon they were inseparable. Ricky was rough around the edges. He had a history of drugs, trouble, and he also had a criminal record. But Jamie saw their connection as a second chance for him, a chance for redemption. They moved in together at the Copperfield Apartments and became engaged. Jamie envisaged a future life together. She'd help him turn his life around, and they'd face the world united. But in January 2007, those heady dreams were shattered. Ricky was arrested for felony larceny, and because of his past history, he was sentenced to 15 months in prison, and just like that, their future was gone. Jamie was absolutely devastated, as you might expect, but her faith never ever wavered. Every single day she wrote him letters counting down the time until they could be together again. Her family, however, weren't so sure about Ricky, and they worried about her living on her own. She was at least an hour from where her mother lived. Now, out there, she didn't have so much of a robust support system, and she couldn't drive either. And even as she took steps towards independence, every day just demanded some form of help. But Jamie reassured them all. She said she had her health provider on call all of the time, 24 hours. She also had Ricky's father, Ricky Simon Sr., just 2 doors down in the same apartment block. He worked as the maintenance man in the block, and he was always there to help. And at first, that arrangement seemed comforting. But what Jamie didn't know, perhaps in a little bit of naivety, is that not all men are there to help. And not all of them help just out of kindness. Some of them have ulterior motives. Some men watch, some men wait, and others have, well, quite dark, twisted secrets. On April the 8th, 2008, everything changed. That morning, Jamie awoke feeling absolutely terrible. She had excruciating stomach pains, and it left her unable to do anything. A call was made to the doctor, and this was a call that would change everything. Her healthcare provider arrived, and they took her immediately to the hospital. Once she was there, the doctors diagnosed that she had the flu. They hurriedly scribbled out a prescription and sent her home. But Jamie wasn't convinced that was what was going on. She called her aunt, Stacey Dennis, and she said that she was convinced that there was something more going on. The doctors had missed something. Later that afternoon, Kim Springer, and that was Ricky Simon Sr.'s ex-girlfriend, dropped by to pick up her dog. The dog was there because Jamie, ever helpful, had offered to dog sit. And when Kim saw that Jamie was so ill, she offered to take her prescription and drop it off at the local pharmacy, leaving it there so that someone else could pick it up later. Jamie thanked her profusely, but as the hours ticked by, her condition worsened. By about 10 p.m. that evening, things had got so bad, Jamie had to go back to the hospital, and this time she called Ricky Simon Sr. and asked for a lift. This he gladly did. He picked her up, took her to the hospital, dropped her off, and then left. Once Jamie got inside, she received pretty disheartening news. The ER was completely packed, and the wait time to see a doctor would be at least 4 hours. Unwilling to wait, she called another friend and asked for a ride home. By midnight, she was back in her apartment, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her. At 1:30 a.m, Jamie was still feeling terrible, and so she made a phone call to a friend in Albemarle, North Carolina. And she was talking to her friend, but mid-conversation, her tone suddenly shifted. She said, "My ride is here. He's here." There were no names and no destination. Nothing was mentioned on the call. And then silence. She hung up, and Jamie Fraley was never seen again. The following morning dawned over Gastonia with an eerie quality. Early light cast long shadows over the quiet streets of the Copperfield apartments. It should have been an ordinary day, but something was amiss. Her healthcare provider, expecting to take Jamie on a long-awaited Social Security appointment, a meeting that Jamie had eagerly anticipated, found the apartment door locked. This was not usually anything out of the ordinary. Jamie was always cautious, keeping her door secured. But when the provider knocked, there was no response whatsoever. A second, longer knock also yielded no response. No shuffle of footsteps to the door. No sound at all. Calls went unanswered, and by the afternoon, concern started to turn to fear. The healthcare provider called Jamie's mother, Kim Fraley, and explained that Jamie had missed her appointment and wasn't answering calls. Kim's stomach dropped. Jamie would never miss an appointment, not unless something was really horribly wrong. Grabbing her phone, Kim dialed Jamie's number again and again and again, but there was no answer. And this was when panic began to seep in. Jamie had been truly sick. Her mother knew that Jamie wouldn't simply vanish. She wouldn't ignore calls. She wouldn't leave anything behind. Something was definitely wrong. After that, Kim immediately contacted the Gastonia Police Department. Her voice was urgent as she requested a welfare check at Jamie's apartment. Within the hour, the first officer arrived at Copperfield Apartments. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place, but after that, Kim Fraley's concerns were justified. The officer approached the apartment door. It was locked, just like the healthcare provider found. There was no noise and no movement whatsoever from inside. He knocked firmly, once, twice, 3 times, and there was no answer. And finally, the complex manager arrived with a key. The door swung open, and at first everything looked normal, but perhaps a little bit too normal. There was no sign of forced entry, no turned over furniture, nothing untoward. And there was no sign of obvious violence. But as the officer went deeper into the apartment, an unsettling detail emerged. Jamie's purse sat on the counter. Her wallet and ID were still inside. Her keys lay beside them. These were all items that someone would grab if they were leaving in a hurry. And yet Jamie hadn't taken any of these. And then the officer noticed at the top of the stairs a pair of her shoes. They were neatly placed, nothing seemingly unusual, and yet the laces were missing. Now, this was strange because Jamie always wore shoes with laces. She never ever left them undone. This was a small detail, and yet it sent a chill down the officer's spine. Something had happened here, he thought. Something that just didn't make sense. And then came the call that changed absolutely everything. At home, Jamie's aunt, Stacey Dennis, had been frantically calling her phone time after time after time. She was praying for an answer, and after countless tries, someone eventually picked up. But it wasn't Jamie. A man's voice answered, and it was quite hesitant and unfamiliar. "Who is this?" Stacey asked. The man explained he was a cable worker, and earlier in the day he'd heard a phone ringing in the grass by the side of where he was working. He'd followed the sound and found a scuffed, dirty phone lying exactly in that area where the sound was coming from. It was Jamie's phone. For a moment Stacey froze, and cold fear washed over her. He then went on to describe where he'd found it. He'd found it near the intersection of New Hope Road and Hudson Boulevard. Stacey was incredulous. This was about 1.5 miles from Jamie's apartment. What was her phone doing out there? Police rushed to the scene. They examined the phone, and the damage suggested that it had been thrown from a moving vehicle. Jamie hadn't simply left her apartment. She hadn't walked away on her own. Something had definitely happened to her. And now one name loomed large. It was the last person to see Jamie alive, Ricky Simons Sr. And so police interviewed Ricky Simons Sr. And at first he seemed quite cooperative. "Yes," he admitted, "I took Jamie to the hospital the night before she disappeared. That was the second time that day that she'd been, as far as I know. But no," he insisted, "I haven't seen her since that time." He said that he'd never picked her up again, and he claimed absolute ignorance of anything that had happened afterwards. But police detected there was something in his tone that was off. He was very flat and detached. It was just as if his concern was pretty much an act, a performance. And then the investigators dug into his past. It turned out that in 1986, Ricky Simons Sr. had strangled his ex-girlfriend, Donna Miller, to death. He was originally charged with first-degree murder, but then he was sent to a psychiatric institution once he threatened to commit suicide. After that, he struck a deal with prosecutors, offering to plead guilty to manslaughter instead of murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and yet strangely, he only served 6. Now, 2 decades later, he was the last man to see Jamie alive. Her family had no inkling of his dark history. Detectives planned to bring him in and pry apart his story and find out what his secrets were. But before they had the opportunity, something completely unimaginable happened. Ricky Simons Sr. was found dead. He wasn't just found dead, he was found dead in the trunk of a car. And the circumstances? Well, they were disturbing beyond words. It was June the 7th, 2008, almost exactly 2 months after Jamie had gone missing. Kim Springer, Ricky Simon Sr.'s ex-girlfriend, had been living her normal life, driving around town, running errands, and yet something really strange was gnawing at her. Her car had a really strange, awful smell. At first she chalked it up to some food that she'd forgotten or a food container that had gone rancid in the heat. But eventually the smell grew completely overwhelming and she had to investigate. On June the 9th, she couldn't stand it any longer. She stopped the vehicle and walked around to the back. She popped the trunk open, and the minute the latch released, the putrid smell hit her like a tidal wave. And that was when she screamed. Inside the trunk and partially decomposed lay the body of Ricky Simons Sr. Kim stumbled back in horror. Her hands were trembling and her mind was racing. How had he been dead for days, lying in the trunk of her car? And she called 911 immediately. Within minutes, officers arrived on the scene and pulled her away from the car, that terrible, terrible thing that she'd found. As police examined the car and his body, more disturbing details emerged. Inside the trunk, next to his decomposing body, they found several items. First of all, there was a large knife. It was clean and appeared unused. And then there was a bag containing Kim's stolen purse and car keys, items that had been missing for weeks. An autopsy was ordered, and the results stunned absolutely everyone. Ricky had not been murdered. He'd died from hyperthermia, heat exhaustion. Somehow he'd ended up in the trunk of the car on a day when temperatures had soared past 90 degrees. He had slowly suffocated from the relentless heat. Even more disturbing, officers surmised that Ricky had been hiding in the trunk of the car, in wait for Kim Springer, waiting to attack her once she got into the vehicle. But something went terribly wrong. Maybe he passed out due to the heat, or maybe he was too drunk or too high to pull the emergency latch. The last thing they thought was maybe he assumed he could slip out unnoticed, but then it was too late. The examination determined that by the time he was found, he'd been in the trunk dead for at least 2 days. It looked like his own twisted plan had backfired, and whatever secrets he held about Jamie had died with him. So with their prime suspect dead, the police investigation was at a standstill. There was no body, there was no concrete evidence of foul play, only a missing young girl and a man with a violent past whose secrets had gone down with him. And yet some clues remained. There was Jamie's final phone call where she whispered, "My ride is here. He's here." Who was she referring to? Ricky Simons Sr. drove a white work van, not a truck. And yet Jamie had mentioned a truck. Had she misspoken? Or was there someone else involved? Was there another person who'd come to pick her up that night while Ricky Simons Sr. stayed behind? And then there was the odd discovery along the investigation's path. There was a bag of trash linked to Ricky Simons Sr., which was found some 2.5 miles away from Jamie's apartment. And this was along a route forming a near-perfect triangle between where Jamie's phone had been found and where Ricky himself was discovered. Police never disclosed what was inside the bag. Was it a clue? Was it a missing piece of evidence? Or was it just another dead end? Theories began to swirl. With no arrests, no confessions, and no concrete evidence, Jamie Fraley's disappearance remains one of North Carolina's most chilling unsolved mysteries. But several theories have emerged over the years. Many people believe that Ricky killed Jamie. He had ample opportunity. As the maintenance man, he held the keys to her apartment. He also had a criminal history. He'd strangled his ex-girlfriend to death before. And what about the missing shoelaces? Some people believe that Ricky had used the shoelaces to strangle Jamie, just like he'd done with his ex-girlfriend in 1986. But if he was responsible, where was Jamie's body? Had he disposed of the remains himself before dying? Or did he enlist an accomplice to help him? And then the next theory was that there was another suspect. Jamie had said, "He is here." Or was she referring to another man, a different person that she trusted? Could Ricky's death have just been a tragic coincidence? Or Was he silenced before he could reveal the real truth? And the last theory was that some suggested Jamie just wandered off. They believe she might have been in the middle of a medical crisis or a mental health episode. But for a lot of people, that theory doesn't hold. She left behind her keys, wallet and ID. There's also the fact that she had plans for the future. She planned to reunite with Ricky Jr. once he was released from jail. So there was no real reason for her to leave voluntarily. And lastly, if she'd collapsed due to illness, why was her phone thrown from a moving vehicle? And now 15 years have passed since Jamie Fraley disappeared, and her family are still hoping to one day learn the truth. Her mother, Kim Fraley, has never stopped searching for her. She declared once in an interview, saying, "Until you show me differently, I'm going to believe that Jamie is still alive." But with no body, no new leads, and a prime suspect who took his secrets to the grave, the truth is out of reach. The only certainties are these. Somewhere out there, somebody knows what happened. Someone holds the answers. And the question remains, will they ever come forward? What do you think happened to Jamie Fraley? Drop your comments below and let us know what you think.
I'll add just one final thought to this tragic tale. Ricky Simons Jr. came out of prison having lost both his father and his girlfriend.
And with that, I'll ask you to stay curious and stay safe, and I'll thank you for watching.